welcome everybody to, welcome to Ohio Diaspora, art from the collection of the National Afro-American Museum and Cultural Center and Ohio artists. Today we are thrilled to present to you Johnny Coleman, an artist here in Ohio. I'm going to read a little bit about Johnny. Johnny is an interdisciplinary artist and educator. His sculptural work and sound installations are composed as intentional gestures in homage and prayer. He considers space and time as elements on his creative palette when setting a stage that integrates a dramatic presentation with the oral tradition of storytelling while consciously focusing on the private space that sometimes exists in the absence of a performer. So I really love the language that you use around your work, how you compile words and how you compile objects. I'm really excited to hear you talk about that. Big shout out to the National Afro-American Museum and Cultural Center for giving us this gift of an exhibition here at the Ohio Arts Council's Riffe Gallery. It will be up until April 11th, but without further ado, I'm going to let you tell the story of you.
Okay. Good
Johnny.
afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Kat. I appreciate that introduction and meeting you and, you know, all that you have done in putting this exhibition together in collaboration with the museum. It's stunning. I walked in here and I was like, I spent the afternoon, as you know, just walking around and around. I love this exhibition. You know. Yeah. So anyway, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, pull it up. We need to.
Yeah, all right. I work with sound all the time, but I never like speaking into a microphone, ever. I just, but it's fine. I'm primarily a storyteller. I love working with materials, with recovered materials. LA is home, and I come from a tradition of assemblage artists that are really rooted in the tradition that is an Afro-Atlantic kind of manipulation of energy. It's called Nkisi. I'm not an initiate in any of the faiths practice Nkisi, but I'm an active practitioner in the artistic traditions that I learned and I grew up surrounded by. An example is that about 4 miles from where my mother's home is in Los Angeles, the intersection of what now is Obama Boulevard and La Brea. So about 4 miles due east of the intersection where our family home is a street called Alameda, and it heads due south into south central LA. And 15 minutes south of, say, USC, the University of Southern California in LA, is Watts Towers. Watts Towers is like this series of spirals that stand stories high. I don't know how high, but they're composed of all of these recovered materials from within one neighborhood in south central LA by this really beautiful Italian man, Simon Rodia. And Mr. Rodia did this with kids and fathers on weekends from the neighborhood, really as an homage to a Spanish architect, Gaudi, right? All around the neighborhoods that Mr. Rodia was working in, all of those neighborhoods at that time were African-American. Those were folks who were transplants from East Texas and Louisiana. And they brought with them these Afro-Atlantic traditions of assemblage. I am a descendant of the folks who work within that tradition in the context of Los Angeles. So my mentors are folks like John Outerbridge, Betty Saar, Noah Purifoy. Though I never worked with Noah Purifoy, his impact is so significant in Los Angeles that you know, nobody working in this from that part of the country, working in the materials and the process that I'm working in, are untouched by someone like Noah Purefoy. So I'm part of an Afro-Atlantic tradition of assemblage that is really rooted in LA to a large extent. So you may know artists like David Hammonds. David Hammonds came out of LA. David Hammonds was John Outerbridge's studio partner in the early 70s. So I'm really, really deeply rooted in this tradition. So the image that's right up there, can I slide this forward a little bit lower? That way I'll be able to see what I'm talking about. Okay, so I've been living and working in Oberlin, Ohio. It's about 2.5 hours due north of here. And it's 15 minutes from Lake Erie. I've been living there for the last 25 plus years. And like Columbus, Oberlin is right on the path of the Underground Railroad, only it's adjacent to the lake. So it was a real kind of catalyst for folks coming through on the Underground Railroad. So the whole time that I've been in Ohio, I've been working really, really intentionally with materials that I've been able to gather from that landscape, because to me, anything that I gather that has organically been a part of the landscape, in my mind, exists as a witness to the history that's taken place over the last 150 years in that landscape. So again, I'm at Oberlin College, and Oberlin as a town, village, and even as an institution has really been deeply, deeply engaged in the Underground Railroad. So all of the materials, or the majority of the materials that I use, are really consciously thought about, intended as witnesses. And I use them as a kind of resonant archive, a reservoir of memory. So in Oberlin, we have one of the oldest standing jazz studies departments in the nation. And the founder of Jazz Studies is a very good friend of mine. His name is Wendell Logan. And Wendell came to Oberlin in '73, I believe. I was still in junior high school or something like that. Probably not in junior high school yet. I was in grade school. But Wendell came to Oberlin to the first, so the oldest conservatory in the nation. Wendell came to Oberlin and started composing, building a program focused on African-American music. And the conservatories in this nation, for the most part, thought of themselves as conservatories of a European tradition. And you know, Europe is no more monolithic than anywhere else in the world, but they thought of themselves as very specific, classical, high art music. They were conservatories of that in the context of Western Europe. And so along comes Wendell Logan, and he's trying to establish a program that focuses on Black music in the context of a conservatory. In fact, the oldest, one of the most prestigious conservatories in the country. So he had a whole lot of pushback. It was not a warm and fuzzy invitation and reception of his presence there. So he fought for years and years and years. But he was successful in establishing like this world-class jazz studies program. So the piece right here is an homage to Wendell and Betty, and the title is actually incorrect. It says, in the tradition, original ancestors for Wendell and Betty. I didn't put it that way, and Wendell would not have put it that way. Wendell's no longer living, and if he saw that, he would have looked at me and said, and he would have, you know, I was like, Wendell, I didn't do that, they did that. But it should say, in the tradition, original ancestors for Betty and Wendell. But Wendell was sick, and towards the end of his life, probably about 4 or 5 years before he passed, Betty and Wendell came over to my studio, and they saw this piece. Simultaneous to my composing this piece, and I'll tell you about what that is in a minute, the dean of the conservatory in Oberlin was in the process of raising money for a jazz studies building. We now have like this, it's been up for about 10 years. We have this world-class building that houses all of theory, all of the theory classes and some of the music history classes and all of jazz studies and practice rooms and a world-class recording studio that is live streamed to the world, and also a music collection and an archive. We have the largest privately held collection of jazz and posters and tickets related to the genre or the medium of jazz. It's housed in that building. So I had Betty and Wendell come over to the studio, and I showed, both of them this piece. And Wendell he's a ball player. He played Division I football. He was a big cat, right? Really solid muscle. And he was used to, if he had to push something through a wall, he could do that. And I'd seen him do that. Thankfully, he never pushed me through a wall, but he was capable. So we had this shiny, brand new, world-class, LEED certified, platinum, actually, building. But Wendell saw the piece and he said, "Johnny, you understand." Essentially, and I'll paraphrase that, you understand that there has to be something of me and my culture in that building. The building is very kind of sterile. It's really austere. It's gorgeous, but it's really austere. There's nothing about Black culture in that building at all. Not even, there's nothing. So it was really important to Wendell that this be in there. So this is on the first floor when you first come into the building. And so I'll tell you what it's composed of. I wish that we were actually at the piece so I could show you each component. But
Take that mic with you.
all right. So this is a symbol. It's a symbol right off of the kit of Billy Hart. Billy Hart is the drum chair. He teaches percussion in the department right now. And all of the fellows in the jazz studies program knew that I was building this piece for Wendell, and they all knew that I was coming to them to ask them for components from their materials, what they teach with, from their instruments, and I'm composing this piece for Wendell that they've had their hands on. It's not something that is decorative, it's something that they've used. It has their time and their attention and their care and their presence in it. So, Billy Hart. So I come over, Billy knows I'm coming, and I come over to his studio. He's actually in the middle of a private lesson. So he's sitting right here at the drum kit. There's a young man sitting right there, and he's got a music staff, and he's taking notes, and Billy and he are talking. So the door's open, and Billy, I just want to let you know I'm here, man. I'll wait until you're done. No, Johnny, come on in. Billy, no, man, I'm good. I'll wait until you're done. So I step in, yes sir, I'm gonna sit down and I'll wait. Johnny, so Billy, you know I'm here and you're in the middle of a lesson. I'm good, man, I'm not in a rush. Johnny, you wanted a piece, right? Yes. Well, what do you think that you should take from this? I'm saying, Billy, I'm not trying to take part of your drum set, right? And long story short, Billy cuts off the lesson while he's working with this young man. He leans forward, he takes the nut, and he unscrews the nut on the stem of this cymbal, pulls the cymbal off. He gave it to me. I didn't say, I want that, give me that. He pulls that cymbal, this brass, hand-pounded cymbal, Zildjian cymbal, and he says, "Will this be all right?" I'm like, "Billy, are you crazy, man?" He hands me that in the middle of a lesson, all right? So that, the font on Zildjian is the font on the title up here, all right? So that is there. What is directly above Billy's symbol is a bridge. This is carved out of spruce. It's quarter sawn spruce, and it's a bridge for an acoustic bass. That's Peter Dominguez, who is a bassist who teaches bass. Peter called me 3 days ago, and he's getting ready to leave. Well, I shouldn't probably say all this, but anyway, Peter, he just told me some stuff. Anyway, this is his bass bridge. And then down here, there are some gut wound strings. Those are also from Peter's. So both his regular stand-up bass with the flat wound strings, but also some gut wound strings. So those are here. So Peter and Peter. Behind this symbol is something that was put in my hands by Marcus Belgrave. Marcus, Detroit brother, plays trumpet, and Wendell brought to run the trumpet, the horn component of jazz studies. And so Marcus knew what I was doing. He said, Johnny, I'm gonna bring you a valve, man. I'll bring you a valve. Perfect. That'll be perfect. And I had this pretty much, the composition was laid out. I knew what I was doing. The balance felt right and everything. I get a call on the cell phone, and Marcus is on his way from Detroit. The young man is driving him, who's going to be ending up coming to Oberlin. And he says, Johnny, I'll meet you over by the department, man. Where should I meet in the back? All right, so he pulls up, and he gets out. Marcus was an elder, and this was in the last probably 5 years of his life. And he and the young man go to the back seat and pull out a case. Now, man, Marcus, what do you need a case? You're bringing me a valve. The valve is about the size of my thumb, and it's a little bit longer. It's about this long. You're gonna bring me a valve for a trumpet. Marcus pulls out a case, and I knew something was wrong. He brought me an alto trumpet. It's the size of a French horn. This is the bell. And this is the bellows, and these are some of the valves. He didn't bring me a valve, he brought me a whole trumpet. Just threw everything on. So that's Marcus. The chair of jazz studies is a guitarist. His name is Bobby Ferrazza, and these are Bobby's flat wounds after he changed the strings. The person who taught trombone, Robin Eubanks. This is Robin's mouthpiece. Gosh, I'm leaving stuff off. There is a clip for a horn. That's the finest, in my view, the finest alto saxophonist on the planet. His name is Gary Bartz. For me, there is Cannonball Adderley, and there's Gary Bartz. That is the clip from his horn. There's something missing here, was stolen, and that is one of the piano keys from Dan Wall, a master pianist who was trained giants for generations. Dan brought me a key from his piano. He pulled a key out of the piano. That was stolen. So he's got to replace some. I mean, he's got to give me something else that I can put back in here. Billy, Peter, Bobby, Marcus, Dan, Gary. Wendell was my friend, so there's somebody that is my older brother. So he and I were talking one day, and he said, John, I've got something for you, man. I know you want to do this piece. I've got something for you. He goes to the garage. There was a file cabinet in the garage. He opens up one of those drawers, and he pulls out this piece of paper, and it's actually a staff, like music paper. And written in pencil on the paper at the top is Goodbye Bellagio, Song for Betty, his wife Betty. Wendell hands me a handwritten composition, the original score for a piece that he wrote for his wife on the last night that they were in Italy on a fellowship where he was overseas for a year. So, I mean, that just wiped me out. He hands me like the original that he wrote in pencil, and so he gave that to me. So that is what is here. You'll see behind, and it's behind wax, so it's preserved. So this has to be burned down before that's going to disappear. This whole composition is sitting, these seats I'll talk about in a minute, but they're sitting in soil, and that soil is from Thompson, Georgia, where Wendell was born and raised. And his younger brother brought me the soil from the base of the steps at the community center that Wendell's father built for the community. Wendell practiced in that community center, and before the center was destroyed, Howard Logan went and got the soil, brought it to me, and these seats sit in that soil. So this is an intentional composition in homage to my older brother, with components from every single member of the Jazz Studies program at Oberlin College. Those seats are West African inspired and ancestor grandfather seats, and they're usually composed, and one person sits in them, and it's an elder. And then when that elder passes, it goes into the family's collection of materials, and it's a kind of memory or a way of remembering that person. And elders have a seat composed for them. So I made those seats out of old material that I've recovered out of old buildings standing on the Underground Railroad in that area, right? So this is like, I talked a long time about this piece, but it's there on the first floor of Jazz Studies. So when you come in, this is what you see, and it was really important to Wendell that this be there, because what this does is put the presence of his culture with like the vitality of his culture in the space, so that, you know, this really gorgeous but rather kind of unremarkable building has something that identifies the culture out of which this music comes from. So that's that piece. All right. So that kind of gives you a sense of basically everything that I do. That's the work that I do and why I do it. So Wendell, I said, is somebody that was close to me. He was my adopted older brother. His wife, my older sister, they meant a great deal to me. I'm not from there, but their presence in Oberlin made Oberlin home for me. So they mean a great deal to me. So this is a piece I did for Wendell. Every place that he lived in Oberlin, he had 2 homes in Oberlin, you know, along with Betty. In every home that the 2 of them had, there was a darkroom that Wendell built in there. He was a photographer and a historian. So this piece is As the Wheel Comes Around. And sitting in wax again, that's a bowl. This is a bowl of Wendell's and Betty's, a silver bowl. In that bowl is beeswax from a community about an hour south of where I live now, Sullivan, Ohio. So it's due north of here. And so I went to a beekeeper, and I bought a ring of wax about 25 pounds. It's about this thick, about that big around, this thick, that big around, and melt it down in a double boiler. I mean, knock off a piece of it. I didn't try to melt that whole 20-some-odd pounds. Knock off a piece of it, melt that down, and I took a viewfinder, like I think it's a 2 1/4 reflex camera, a gorgeous camera, and I set that in the molten wax. And then these are piano strings from the conservatory. Right there is Wendell's mouthpiece from the soprano. He's a really elegant guy, so, you know, again, this is another one of those elder chairs and celebration of Wendell. All right, this is another piece for Wendell, and this one is the archivist. And again, the wax and the camera, and these recovered materials with this small personal architecture. And this is that wood that you can't nail. So it's really dense and hard. So it's put together with mortise and tenons, like traditional joinery that goes back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. This piece is right there. And this is lifted, lifted for Shoulders. And Shoulders is his nickname, Wendell's nickname. So he put that whole program on his shoulders. And so, you know, the guys who worked with him long before I ever met Wendell, they would call him Shoulders. So in here is his soprano saxophone and the case for soprano, and there are, although he played soprano, he also played piano. He never was in the composition department at the conservatory, but he was the most prolific composer, whether it was jazz or contemporary classical music. Wendell Logan was the most prolific of all of the composers. So there are a couple of his trumpet mouthpieces there. There are strings off of his piano. Because he held things and mostly he held people up. That's an oversized traditional neck rest that's rising up out of that little birdhouse. The birdhouse has an entrance at both ends, at the front and the back, so I'm referencing an Akan or a Ghanaian traditional saying, go back and fetch it, or you can't know where you're going unless you know where you've been. There's this saying in Sankofa that translates, or what it means is go back and fetch it. It's a bird flying forward with its long neck turned, and it's looking back over its shoulder. So that's Sankofa, and it's about being very conscious of both where you've been and where you're going. So again, this is like that material is I see as a witness, and really, really super hard, really old growth oak. And what else was it? Oh, I didn't know what this is, what these things are. And years ago, Wendell told me what those serrated kind of wooden structures are, and they're hog stretchers. Somebody born and raised in the South would know that. I wasn't born and raised in the South. But Wendell, you know, grew up in segregated South amongst country people. He came from a small town, Thompson, Georgia, low country. So he knew what that was. And when you butcher a hog, you split the chest and open the cavity. Those tines will hold the rib cage apart as you're disemboweling the animal. So it ain't warm and fuzzy. Life isn't always, you know, it's got edges and teeth, sharp stuff that'll cut you. So all of the elements there are Wendell's. What he and Betty gathered in their travels, those are Japanese bells. The beads I pulled out of Wendell and Betty's home. So this is lifted for shoulders. And a detail of that piece. And again, I just always knew him as being an incredibly elegant, and if he needed to, he could be real rough and very, I mean, folks were scared of him. But he was like one of the sweetest human beings I knew. So I wanted to do something that I felt, you know, acknowledged and celebrated just this generous, sweet, beautiful human being that was my older brother. And this is shoulders. So that was lifted for shoulders. This is shoulders. And this is his music stand from his studio. So he had a piano in the studio. He had a little MIDI interface, computer, lots and lots of albums, and a music stand. And it's one of his belts coming around here. This is off of the porch that leads up to Betty and Wendell's front door. So there was always music, wind chimes, always, just beautiful. That is a skin off of a djembe, so West African drum. And I asked one of the drummers that, you know, Wendell's had his hands on, man, would you save your skins when you change your drums? And so these 2 or 3 drummers have all done this. I've got a bag in the basement of skins. And so that's one of the skins from one of the drummers that Wendell's had his hands on. This piece is for another musician, Dr. Yusef Latif, somebody whose music, you know, it's just, you just have to listen to the music. And I had a chance to meet Dr. Yusef he went by Brother Yusef. I had a chance to meet him probably about 6 or 7 years ago, and a friend of mine was mentored by Yusef Latif. So Brother Yusef came to our little town, and a room about this size was packed and standing room only, and we listened to this man in his early 90s who stood ramrod straight, spoke very, very softly, but everybody leaned in and didn't miss a word that he said. He'd been a vegan since 1948. He was one of the most just dignified, really beautiful demonstrations of what it is to be a human being that I've ever seen. So I had the pleasure of just being present and listening to him, and I composed this piece for him, Seated Noble, for Brother Yusef. And all of these materials are built old school way, by hand, with there's no nails. That's it there. On the handle adjoining to that tool box, there are these really beautiful knurled brass nuts that attach the handle to that lead toolbox. And I laid the toolbox out in lead because it's an elemental material that though it'll get patinated, it doesn't change. It's like elemental. It's just unchanging. And so I want to talk about something good that doesn't necessarily change. This is a detail in that bent hickory handle is pinned into a piece of oak that goes through the tabletop, old school. So it literally is a through mortise on a beautiful piece of oak, recovered old oak, that passes through the thickness of that table. And it's just like, you can see how everything's done, but it's done with a lot of care, like the music, like the culture that the music emerged out of. This is a piece for a poet back in the landscape that I'm from. His name is Kamal Dawood, and I meant to bring a small book, and I didn't realize that I don't have it with me until I went to reach for it. I left it sitting in the counter. Kamal Dawood is a spoken word artist. He's a griot of the highest order. And Kamal and a master drummer by the name of Billy Higgins, they put together a performance space in a small neighborhood in LA that's adjacent to where my mom's home is, where, within LA, where home has been for me most of my life. This performance space is called the World Stage. And Kamal is this poet that nobody's heard of that is just, to my mind, not just one of a handful of people at the highest order who demonstrates a contemporary African-American poetic tradition, literary tradition, but within a spoken component of that. He is, the way in which his work is composed intentionally, and the many layers that are in his stories. One line of his is, take long stares at your hands into a true love returns to your touch. Then touch. Polish the tombstones of those who died too young until they become mirrors in which you can see yourselves. Take long stares at your hands. I mean, he's just an amazing, amazing storyteller. And, he just is very, very confident in the relationship between the narratives that he's composing, the culture, and the importance and the dynamism that's within the culture, the importance of just keeping some memories alive, keeping a tradition alive. And so this kind of orality that's at the core of the culture, he is like a demonstration of that at the highest order. So Kamal Dawood, D-A-A-W-O-O-D. And he is in LA, And he has a collection of poems called Leimert Park, L-E-I-M-E-R-T Park. If you go on YouTube, punch in, come out that way, Leimert Park. I put a W in there, there isn't a W, it's B-A-A, then not a hyphen, but a accent, and then O-O-D. And you'll be able to hear him read, you'll be able to hear him read Leimert Park, or I Want to Give Art Blakey's Drumsticks to a Child Without a Father. Those are two that I would recommend listening to. Another would be The Men. Lord, an amazing poet. And for me, he's among a handful, and many of the folks that I'd be able to name off, you wouldn't recognize their names. But he is among a handful of, for me, the very, very finest living poets. So anyway, that piece right there is Sentinel. And that is, a sentinel is somebody who calls people, and delivers the word. That's for him. So again, it's all recovered material, and it's put together with these ancient traditions where the wood is carefully fitted to another piece of wood that passes through it. So old joinery traditions that you find all over the world, from the East throughout Europe. The traditions have variances in them, but the mechanics repeat over and over again, all over. So I wanted to, primarily, although I love working with materials, and these are pieces that mean a great deal to me because they're made for individuals that mean a great deal to me. I'm like a shy person, but I really love people, and these are people that mean a lot to me. Wendell is somebody I knew for many, many years. Kamau, I've been adjacent to, but I've admired his work for a long, long time, and he's an acquaintance. I'm not blessed to be able to call him a friend, though I'd like to. And Brother Youssef I met once, but I grew up listening to his music. So these are all people who mean a great deal to me. Today's Thursday. Mm-hmm. A week ago Tuesday, I had the opportunity to do a culmination of an intentional gesture for a writer and a poet who means a great deal to me. Toni Morrison, Chloe Walker, and we all know she passed last August. I was driving into Akron to work on a piece dealing with this young man. I'll talk about this piece in a moment, but dealing with a sketch for an ongoing series of pieces in homage to a young man who died in Oakland back in 1853. And so I'm driving into Akron, and I hear on NPR that Toni Morrison died the evening before. So this is Tuesday morning, and I'm hearing that Toni Morrison, this giant visionary artist, died the morning before, and I'm hearing it for the first time. My hands come up off the wheel. Traffic, like heavy traffic on the freeway. And for a moment, I'm just like, it's like in shock. And I wasn't really able to sleep for a number of days. And then at the end of that week, I had like this kind of outline of a gesture to do for her. And so last Tuesday, in Oberlin, at one of the benches, Ms. Morrison had this vision that there is no place to actually acknowledge and think about and not think about what was lost and sacrificed by so many who were enslaved in this nation. Not a tall building, not a carved tree, not even a bench by the road. So one of those benches by the road is in Oberlin. And I was part of composing a gesture where we invited the world to call in to the bench, and people over a 9-hour period came to the bench and read pieces of her work and gave testimonies to her impact and that was live streamed all over the world. So there are like these individuals who mean a great deal to me. So it's not hard to talk about those individuals. But for the most part, as much as I love material and working with material, I'm a storyteller. And I tend to focus most of my practice as a storyteller in immersive environments, not discrete objects like that, though I love this. For the most part, I compose entire spaces. And the spaces are composed of smell and intentionally selected materials and sound and architectural, theatrical environment that is charged in particular ways. So what I was just describing about the project last Tuesday from Miss Morrison, before the day started, before the live stream went up, an initiate into Santeria, a priestess, met myself and a master stick carver from Lorraine, where Miss Morrison is from, and we placed a bench, a small stool, West African-inspired stool, that was a replica of what I'd given Miss Morrison 11 years ago. We placed that on the bench. We placed flowers on either side of that. Chris Wade, the master stick carver, he placed the stick that he carved on the stool that I carved. That was filmed. And before anything was done with it, this Santeria priestess put an altar under the bench and then activated the entire set, the whole thing, right? And not the gesture, but the result of the gesture, they activated stick, stool, bench, and the altar underneath it. All of that was filmed and then live streamed all day in a theater with an altar on this side that was activated, an altar on that side, a podium, like a pulpit from a church, recovered pulpit, and the stool and the stick right there, and a ring of small West African architectural structures on the floor in front of that screen, and a murmur of voices of people speaking about Miss Morrison while people called in from all over, and at the podium people spoke. So there was like the simultaneity that you find in a jazz club. Shut up, I'm up here, shut up, right? When people are still talking in the bar. Or what you hear on any Sunday when folks are called to the altar and you're in the congregation and there are people kneeling at the altar and the elders and the pastor and the deacons and the deaconesses are sitting with the individuals at the altar, and the murmur that you'll hear. So that kind of simultaneity was what was happening in the space all day as people came up and read passages of the Word. So my process is really about these really kinds of intentional gestures within immersive environments. So this is one. How are we doing on time? We all right?
It's 7:16. You're
All right.
doing fine.
All right. So I'll describe what's happening here. So again, I've been in Oakland for the last 25, 6, 7 something-ish years, long time. When I first came to Oakland, there was a story that you would hear, and we don't hear it anymore. And the story was about a 4-year-old little boy by the name of Lee Howard Dobbins. Lee Howard Dobbins arrived in Oakland in 1853, March of 1853, and arrived sick. And he was with a group of women, and there's not much said more than that, except that he arrived sick. He was left in the care of a family in Oakland with the intention that he would rejoin the group of women that brought him to Oakland en route to Canada. He wasn't able to continue. He was left to recover. They went on to Canada. He died 9 days later. That story is something that was part of the culture that was still spoken about in the town when I got there. You don't hear much about Lee Howard Dobbins these days. But for the last, say, 15, 20 years, I've been going down to Mason County, Kentucky, and Brown County, Ohio. They're right on the Ohio River, directly across from each other, about an hour south of Cincinnati. And I've been researching at the Gateway Center in Maysville in their archives. Last October, I was in Frankfurt at the State Archives, and I've been back and forth to John Parker's house on the river, the Ohio side of the river. That was my alarm to stop talking. I've been back and forth between John Parker's house and John Rankin's house at the top of the hill in Ripley, Ohio, and then across the river to the archives in Maysville. And I'm looking to learn about the Dobbins family. There were 9 Dobbins families in Mason County. These are all families that came from Virginia. Kentucky is Virginia, right? Kentucky was the western edge of Virginia. But the Dobbins family, in the late 18th century, they were Virginia blue bloods, and they moved to the western edge of the state. And there were a number of those family members, and on one of those family farms, Lee Howard Dobbins was conceived, and we won't get into how he was conceived, but he was conceived and born, and his mother became sick. And she asked a friend who was also enslaved on the same family farm where Lee Howard Dobbins was conceived and born. She asked, would you adopt my son? And if you run, take him with you. So this woman, we only know her as Miriam. Her husband was sold south from Kentucky. And at that point, she became really concerned. Then she got the news that her daughters were being sold south. Kentucky, northern Kentucky, and Maysville is pretty far north, was a hemp producer. A lot of hemp was grown, and when you think about the Industrial Revolution, it's a lot of rope in fabric. It's like very inexpensive fabric, but really beautiful fabric and durable fabric. So if you are working in hemp, there was huge markets for hemp, let alone sales and all of that. So the woman heard that her daughters, or one of her daughters, was going to be sold. So she gathered her daughters and her granddaughters, so 8 women, and she kept her word to bring that little boy. So she brought 8 women, Miriam and 7 of her daughters and granddaughters, brought a 4-year-old sick little boy. And they didn't buy a ticket to the Greyhound. They made it across the Ohio River. And they, by hook, crook, and faith and blessing, they made it all the way about 260 miles to Oberlin, 15 minutes south of Lake Erie. And they did that running and hiding, and to walk that length, it's probably about 3 months, and they got there in March. That means they left in the dead of winter, right? Without the benefit of Greyhound or, a flight or jumping on 71 North. It was really, really rough. So they arrived, and this boy is too sick to continue. Long story short, this is 1853, Fugitive Slave Act is 1850, can't stay here. So they alerted, or someone on their behalf alerted a ship captain on the lake, with a freighter. And there were captains who were willing to sneak fugitives on board and then get them transported across the lake. So they made it to Canada. We don't know their names, other than Miriam. I've been researching this for the last at least 15 years. And I've found some things, and then those things have been misplaced in the archive, and so I go back to double check, and there's some things I haven't been able to verify again. But this piece is the second in a series of intentional gestures in homage to this little boy, Lee Howard Dobbins. This is the second. The first one was to speak him back into history because he's really disappeared. And so I spoke to a number of African-American women in Oberlin and asked them, if they would speak directly to this little boy. We went into a recording studio, and I recorded them speaking to the little boy. And I brought their voices out of about 4,000 pounds, 2 tons of Ohio river rock, and then put a vernacular piece of architecture. It's a European grain elevator, like those little small huts that have walls that, rather than being parallel, they flare out, and then they're off the ground to keep corn or grain away from rodents. So I placed a dock made of recovered old growth material on the rocks, and then put a grain elevator on that dock and floated, and it made it really beautiful. It's like luminous white, it's post and beam structure, open roof, and paper airplanes floating up out of that. In that space, you get the sound of a rocking chair and these women's voices speaking from 4 directions. So 2 groups of women in the north, and the south, and east, and the west. So there's 8 women all the way around. There were 9 in the party. So there's a silhouette of a chair, a child's chair, off coming through a window, because he didn't make it, but that's the 9th person in the party. So that's the first in the series for Lee Howard Dobbins. This is the second in the gesture. And I'm right now, like, I have a deadline for Saturday for a grant, this huge grant, and I'm writing for the 3rd in the culminating gesture. And that one is I'm gonna find those women, name each one of them, find the descendants, thank them, finish the journey where they landed, finish the journey for the little boy, and then speak each of those women into history. So the last gesture is in Canada, acknowledging, thanking, with a real gratitude, these women who, at great risk to themselves, took a 4-year-old little boy on foot nearly 300 miles while being pursued to give him the chance, along with themselves, at a future. It's just crazy. They did it. They did it. He just wasn't able to survive it. So this piece is imagining his crossing from this life into the next. So this piece is crossing the river for Lee Howard Dobbins, and I'll play some of what you would have heard in this space.
Where is
This piece no longer exists. This was a year ago on Lake Erie. So on the southern shore of Lake Erie. The culminating piece will be on the northern shore of Lake Erie, where the women landed. This was at Spaces Gallery in Cleveland. So this mix was 4-channel, and I'm playing it in stereo now, so it's a translation for the recording this space. So there are 9 panels here. That window frame is made the old world way, so through mortises and tannins, bridal joints in the corners, milk paint, the oldest paint that we know of on the planet. It's made with casein, so milk, protein, minerals, and lime. So that paint we have examples of in the Old Kingdom pyramids in Egypt. So we know that this paint has been actively used. We found it on caves, old caves. So that's the paint that paints these frames. So there are 9 sections that each of the old is from the oldest section of Westwood Cemetery. Supposedly, the little boy is buried there. I don't think he's buried there. Westwood Cemetery is the current cemetery, and it was established in the 1870s. Little boy died in 1853. I don't think that they moved his body and other poor people's bodies. I don't think their bodies were moved from the old cemetery. So I'm gonna find the old plots at City Hall and ask, and then I'm gonna see if there's any indication that he was ever moved. I don't think he was. I think he's under the park on the corner of Main and something or other that's right across from McDonald's, right downtown Oakland. I think he's still there. But want to do this piece to finish that journey for me. So anyway, this is a standing oak in the southernmost section, the oldest section of Westwood Cemetery. And one little boy.
So John, you're at 7:27. You want to try and get through a couple more slides?
Yeah.
And then maybe take a couple of questions.
All right.
We're beyond time, so I want to respect if everyone, if you need to pop up, don't feel shy about that. But if you need more, Johnny, take your time and go ahead and stay here.
This is a scene of inside the space. So that dock is made of recovered material, and it has chamomile flowers sprouting out of the dock. The boat is handmade. It's 7.5 feet long. Handmade green oak, steam bent, and then lashed together. The two figures are references to his two mothers, the woman who conceived and bore him, and the woman who adopted him and tried to bring him to the possibility of the future. They are dressed as an Afro-Atlantic deity, Yemaya, the mother of all waters. The Ohio River and Lake Erie, and like the mothers, so I think of them as the two mothers. So a shot of the boat. The boat is the bow of the boat, so the tip of the boat, I set up a compass and I got dead 0 degrees due north, and I put that boat right on due north. So it's pointing directly at the lake, which is on the other side of this wall. Is a loading dock. The other side of that is the edge of the lake, literally. What else is here? So this is those two mothers and those flowers, and what you hear is what was in this space. It was just this really quiet space, imagining his transition from this world to the next world. The boat you could hold out 7.5 feet long. You could hold it out with one hand. I guarantee it weighs 17 pounds. So it was lashed together and very carefully, like hand carved, steam bent, lashed in the handle and the gun, and tied together and then suspended. So that's the piece. That's the last slide. That's that.
So before we let him off the hook, are there any questions that we have?
Where did you get the oars from?
I found them. I'm always looking. Yeah, I work almost exclusively with recovered materials. Unless I need 2x4s, and I don't use those much except to build walls, like the walls that had the skin on it and then they were lit from behind. I don't use good wood for that. I use 2x4s for that, but everything else is fine. Like I go looking for it. So I found those oars. They needed to actually not be something brand new. They needed to have actually been used, had a history, had somebody's hands on them, had their own energy.
More questions? Yes. Let me run it.
I had a question, well, actually kind of two, but the bent hickory handle over there, did you craft that or find that?
I found that.
I thought you, okay.
Yeah.
Was it part of a tool or something?
It was. That was the end of a shovel, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, a shovel or a hoe or but yeah, it's a hand tool. I go hunting for those. I go to the flea markets. I'm looking for material that's soaked in history. I can carve that, but it wouldn't mean anything. I needed to have like somebody's hands and some history in it.
Do you work with any other culture?
Do I work with any other culture? Yeah. I'm here, so I did a piece for Catherine and Levi Coffin. They're two, what is the culture that they're a part of? They were, I'm blanking on their culture, but they were European American transplants from North Carolina, and they were not Amish. I'm just blanking on their culture, but they migrated to a space in Indiana, Fountain City, Indiana, and they had a home that they consciously built within this small community that was part of their culture. They had a stream behind their house. They snuck people up from that stream. They built their home on a fountain, and the fountain's downstairs in the basement. So they had live running fresh water in their basement, and they shepherded 1,000 enslaved people through their house. Then from there they moved to Cincinnati and they kept going. So I've been homages to them. And I'm from Southern California, so I've for a long time worked also with the culture. I grew up with black folk from East Texas and Louisiana, and I grew up in Southern California, so I was surrounded with Mexico. So I've worked with the culture that I'm from.
Yeah, I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about this piece, which is so beautiful. The shape of it is something like a boat or a canoe or maybe a cradle, and I just wondered if you could talk more about
I mean, all of what you said, I really thought of it as a cradle, but it's none of those. It's actually there is a culture that is something that you can choose to be a part of with Shaker. And that is a bread bowl. That's for flour. And the Shaker's made that. Handmade. I want to talk about master craftspeople. I mean, I look at that and I'm like, just jeez. Yeah. So I found that. And that's hand carved. And all that I did to it was put a wash on the outside and put wax on the inside. Everything you see, it's done. I saw that, I was like, oh, boy. And I was so happy to find that they were willing to sell it. It was in a flea market, and they didn't care about it. But I saw it, I'm like, I gotta have that. Yeah, this is a trumpet. And it's, trumpet is a way of signaling the folk. So this is just, the piece is sound. So it's to signal the folk. That's the chord.
So Johnny, you clearly have been doing assemblage and installation work for some time. It's probably deep in your roots from the very beginning, but can you articulate when you recognize your voice within this work? Like, how did you get there and recognize that the hand of another was really important to you, to make sure that within that assemblage you had that in how you were building your sculptures? Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
It's a really beautifully crafted question. My mentor, I went to art school. I was older than the students I teach now before I ever went to school. I started at like 24 or 25, and on my first day, since I had no experience in the wood shop, and I had money to get through 1 year, and then I had loans, and I had work study. And so 2 weeks before classes started, I went to my work study assignment. And I didn't know anything about the wood shop, and I was assigned to the tool crew. They said, you don't know anything about the wood shop, man. So go down there, introduce yourself to the guy at the end of the hall. He's painting the video studio. The guy who was painting the video studio was Ulysses Jenkins, one of Charlie White's students. Charlie White's a master draftsman. And the reason I wanted to grow up to be an artist in the first place was because of Charlie White. So Charlie White's student became my mentor, and he taught me about this assemblage tradition. I wanted to be a draftsman. Ulysses taught me about this notion of energy being actively present in materials, and that California African-American assemblage tradition that was within the work of John Bridge and Noah Purifoy and Sengan Gree and Timothy Washington and Betty Starr, and I can go on and on and on. So it wasn't like an immediate thing. I still was really connected to drawing and painting and printmaking, but by the end of my first year, Ulysses had his hands on me enough that he had brought me around to people like, he introduced me to Sengan Gree. He introduced me to Betty Starr. He made sure that I got over and spent time with John Bridge. So by the time I left the school in LA, Otis, they had brought me through this transition. And I took really naturally to the woodshop. I didn't know, but I had no experience in it. But once I got in there, it was something that I loved a lot. And I didn't know anything about David Hammons. I didn't know anything about an assemblage tradition, but Ulysses, he just slowly but surely, and before I knew it, I loved it as much as he did. It was a slow process. I don't even know when, like, oink, all of a sudden, it became, something that works for me as resident.
Great. I want to thank everybody for coming out this morning. I would be remiss not to mention that you're also in Ohio Arts Council Individual Excellence Award winner, which is really such a treat to be able to have you as an artist here in Ohio and noted as one of those winners. And, well awarded otherwise, but it's nice to have that tie. So, again, thank you all for coming out to Ohio Diaspora and for the National Afro-American Museum and Cultural Center for putting this together for us with Rose Rojas. You did a great job, and we're so thankful for your time. This show is up until April 11th. Come back often, bring friends, bring family. We love seeing you. So our next talk is March 12th with Bing Davis. Same time, same place. Hope to see you there. Have a great rest of your evening.